If you haven't yet seen episode 1, watch and listen to it first, and this will make far more sense. To better understand the vast difference between what creation scientists are saying and what secular scientists are saying for the age of the Earth, a timeline is useful. This is the end of a ruler with the metric markings facing up. On this ruler, each centimeter is divided into 10 millimeters, the shortest marked increments on this ruler. If each millimeter represents 1,000 years, the real scientific evidence shows that the Earth, along with the rest of the universe, is about 7,000 years old. The surface of the Earth was recreated by the world flood that the scientific evidence and scripture indicate was about 5,000 years ago. If you listen to most other creation scientists, you will hear about 6,000 years ago for creation and about 4,350 years ago for the Noahian deluge. I have reasons for my opinion, which is also based upon scripture for this difference. On this timeline, those differences are less than 1 millimeter. What secular scientists claim is between 4.54 and 4.55 billion years for the age of the Earth. Richard Dawkins rounds this up to 4.6 billion years.
To believe that the world is less than 10,000 years old, given that we know the world is actually 4.6 billion years old, it's equivalent to believing that the width of North America, right across from New York to San Francisco, is less than 10 yards. And that's the scale of the error.
His analogy. The difference between the dogma of 4.6 billion years and the truth of less than 10,000 years is profound. On this timeline, my 7,000 years for the age of the Earth is 7 millimeters. Richard Dawkins' 4.6 billion years ago would be 4.6 kilometers on this timeline. 1 million years would be 1 meter, and 1 billion years would be 1,000 meters, or 1 kilometer. 4.6 kilometers is about 2.86 miles. This is an aerial view of a quarter-mile running track. So 4 laps on this track is 1 mile. So on this timeline, 4.6 billion years would be 11.4 laps around this track, compared to 7 millimeters ago for creation and 5 millimeters ago for the world flood. One of the few things that I agree with Richard Dawkins about is the vast difference between the biblical time scale and the current deep time dogma of 4.6 billion years. In episode 1, I was critical of a lecture given by Professor Ian Stewart about the theory of Pangaea. Ian Simpson Stewart has a lot of titles. MBE, that stands for Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. FGS, he is a Fellow of the Geological Society of London. Of course, FRSE, Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Born in 1964, Ian does not want the public to know his birthday. 3 lines just to name all his titles. If Dr. Stewart isn't the official world authority on matters of geology, who is? Without belief in deep time, belief in this sort of thing is implausible. Just as with deep time, belief in this is implausible. This is a picture of Pangaea that Ian Stewart uses in his lecture. What this actually is a computer animation. Someone took a world map and made the continents fit together, showing the national borders with each country a different color and recognizable. I used paint to type in a few questions and comments. If I were actually in that room with the BBC camera crew asking those questions, does anyone think I would get an answer? Or would I be told to leave and then made to leave if I didn't? Ian Stewart remarks in this lecture how especially the eastern coastline of South America seems to fit the western coastline of Africa so well. They do appear to fit. On this world map that shows the fault lines and tectonic plates, notice how the fault line between South America and Africa also fit the coastlines of both continents. Much in the same way the banks of a creek or river often have the same shape as the path of the flowing water that eroded their shape. This fault line is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a volcanic ridge on the bottom of the ocean. Drawing the surface of a sphere onto a flat map causes a distortion called the Mercadian projection. The polar regions look disproportionately bigger than the equatorial regions. Because of the Mercadian projection, Greenland looks as big as the entire continent of Africa, when in actual square miles, Africa is about 14 times the surface area of Greenland. The man who first proposed the theories of continental drift and Pangaea, Alfred Wegener, died in Greenland and was buried there in 1930. This was the end of Wegener's fourth expedition to Greenland, funded by the government of his native Germany. 50-year-old geologist Alfred Wegener and his 23-year-old assistant, Rasmus Wilhelmsen, wound up in a situation where they had to walk a long way to get to a warm place in very frigid conditions. Neither one of them made it. Wegener died first and was buried by his younger assistant Rasmus in a grave in the ice marked by Alfred's skis. Rasmus Wilhelmsen was never again seen or found. Wilhelmsen's body, along with Wegener's diary, are presumed to be buried under over 100 meters of ice to this day. Although Wegener's theories attracted early support from Alexander de Toit, Arthur Holmes, and Milutin Milankovic, it also drew harsh criticism. The American Association of Petroleum Geologists organized a symposium specifically in opposition to the continental drift hypothesis. Wegener's fellow German geologist, Franz Kosmat, said the oceanic crust was far too firm for the continents to simply plow through. In Wegener's time, these fault lines and tectonic plates had yet to be located and mapped. This map says the tectonic plates of the world were mapped in the second half of the 20th century. That means after 1950, and Alfred Wegener died in 1930. Alfred Wegener did not know where these tectonic plates were. Wegener based his theories of Pangaea and continental drift on biology and fossil evidence. The ideas of Pangaea and continental drift fit with evolution by providing an explanation for the different species of fauna and flora we see on continents and islands separated by vast distances. This map shows the continents shaped as they are today and fit together to match Wegener's theories. The fossils of 3 different animals and 1 plant have been found in these color-coded ranges. This was some of the evidence Wegener cited to claim his theory was true. Now that we know where these tectonic plates and fault lines are, let's try to see how this theory is physically possible. This is one world map showing the fault lines and tectonic plates. And here's another. Due to the Mercadian projection, Greenland looks as big as Africa, and it's hard to tell where the fault lines on the sphere of the Earth really go. This is a screenshot of an interactive globe at echalk.co.uk. Here we see the fault line that runs through near the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. From north to south, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and fault line runs east of Greenland through Iceland. At that point, it's between the North American and Eurasian plates. Then it's between the North American and African plates. Then on down the middle of the South Atlantic between the South American and African plate until it ends at the Antarctic plate. This map is color-coded to show the elevation of sea level on land and depth below sea level in the oceans. The red must mean ice glaciers. There is a lot of red in Greenland and Antarctica. There is a little red in the highest mountain ranges. The shades of brown are the higher mountains and the yellow the lower mountains. The lowest elevations above sea level are green. The light blue near the land is shallower continental shelves. These are composed of sediment and sedimentary rock of varying thickness. The rate at which silt or solid materials that the world's rivers carry out to sea has been measured and calculated for every large dam ever built. These rates have also been measured because of all sorts of agricultural and environmental concerns. The thickness of and extent of these sediments when compared to known erosion rates matches a catastrophic world flood about 5,000 years ago. The author of this Wikipedia site about Alfred Wegener claims that his original theory had Pangaea connecting the continents at their continental shelves, not their current coastlines. This would result in a Pangaea looking more like this map with at least some extra land that inevitably would be eroded away over 200 million years. The Wikipedia author also says that Wegener estimated the velocity of the continents at 250 centimeters per year compared to 2.5 centimeters per year, the currently accepted rate. That 100 times faster rate would put Pangaea together at 2 million years ago with extra land area there to account for inevitable erosion. A Pangaea that looks like this 2 million years ago is still wrong, but far more believable than a Pangaea looking like this 200 million years ago. The motion of tectonic plates relative to one another should be referred to as an average velocity. Unlike the orbit of a moon or planet or the hands on a clock, seismic events or earthquakes happen within a few seconds or perhaps minutes periodically. Whenever a major earthquake has happened in recent decades, reports go out about how far the tectonic plates moved and how the moment of inertia of the Earth had slightly changed as a result. Looking at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean on this color-coded elevation and depth map, we see the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and fault line running down the middle of the deep part of the Atlantic Ocean, shown in dark blue. What Wegener's theory originally claimed was that all of the 1,000 miles or so of dark blue expanded out from that underwater volcanic mountain range over 2 million years. Most of that deep ocean bottom is basalt or formerly molten lava, as opposed to sedimentary rock. Although they are both wrong, Wegener's idea of a Pangaea is far more believable than the map and fable of Ian Stewart's lecture. A Pangaea 2 million years ago drifting at a rate of 2.5 meters per year. Well, they call it continental drift. I would call what we have observed since equipment has existed to measure such things a series of seismic events of various magnitude jolting the continental masses of the New World from the Old World, making the Atlantic a little wider with each earthquake. 2.5 meters per year over 2 million or 2 times 10 to the 6 years equals 5 times 10 to the 6 meters, which equals 5 times 10 to the third kilometers, or 5,000 kilometers. Looking at this map, 5,000 kilometers looks about right. Dr. Walter Feit was professor of zoology and taught evolutionary biology at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. Like many creation scientists, it was the scientific evidence that led Dr. Feit to believe in the Bible. He has an 8-part lecture series on the science of creation versus evolution here on YouTube. In part 3, entitled Bones and Stones, Dr. Feit talks about erosion and orogeny. Points made here explain why establishment scientists must ignore the realities of erosion to convince the world that all the fossils found in the sedimentary rocks are millions of years older than 5,000 years. Orogeny can replace land mass lost to erosion, but it cannot replace the fossil record.
In the book Evolution of Life, we read time and again, wind, water, and ice have cut and destroyed rocks that have been elevated to form continents. That there is a fossil record at all seems rather remarkable. This is a fascinating point. Think about this. Here you have all the geological layers, and they contain all these fossils. Now let's take a mountain range, for example, that's eroding quickly. And you erode it away, and you're removing it. What are you removing? A record of time with all the fossils in it. And so we say, that, for example, the Himalayas, they are eroding away at 1,000 meters, or at least 2 meters every 1,000 years. That's the exact figure that they give. About 2 meters every 1,000 years. So that's just over 2 yards gone. Now what's very interesting is if that is so, if you're rubbing it out, why is the mountain still there? Well, science gives the answer and says the mountain is still there because it is being uplifted. We call that orogeny, uplift of the mountain. Now that's fine. That's a pretty good theory, and the mountain actually is still rising. You can measure the rate of rise, and that more or less keeps up with the rate of eradication at the top. But now there's a problem. If this process has been going on for millions of years, rubbing out the top and still having the height because you're lifting it up from the bottom, can you then still have the record of the history of the world in the top? Yes or no? You cannot have your cake and eat it. You cannot rub it out and say it's eroded away, but it's still there because we've lifted it up. Then you should have only the stuff right at the bottom that is still there. But no, we have the whole record there. So that cannot be. So somewhere there's a flaw in the story. Somehow there's a problem. How can we still have a fossil record when it's been eradicated over and over again by a process called erosion over millions and millions of years? And so some scientists have this tongue-in-cheek statement: historical geology is a record of events, most of which never took place in time, much of which never existed.
The rate stated was 2 meters every 1,000 years. He was specifically talking about mountain ranges that would have higher rates than flat areas. Let's see how that compares with Wegener's original theory of continental drift in Pangaea. 2 meters every 1 times 10 to the third, or 1,000 years, times 2 times 10 to the 6th, or 2 million years, equals 4 times 10 to the 3rd meters, or 4 kilometers. So in 2 million years, any fossils that have remained above sea level had to have been buried at least 4 kilometers deep to have remained above sea level all this time. The most stubborn, hard-to-erode rocks like granite are not what fossils are ever found in. Does this globe showing the continental shelves look like 2 kilometers thick of sedimentary matter has eroded off of those vast continents into the ocean? Bear in mind this hypothetical is just 2 million years ago, 2 meters ago on our time scale. Maybe Walter Vythe is wrong, way wrong, by 100-fold wrong. He was talking about high mountain ranges that would have higher rates than flat areas. Once again, this is Wegener's abandoned yet more plausible theory, assuming the true erosion rate is 100 times as slow as stated by Walter. 2 centimeters is 2 times 10 to the minus 2 meters divided by 1,000 years. That's 1 times 10 to the 3rd years times 2 million years, or 2 times 10 to the 6th. Okay, 2 times 2 is 4. Then we got 6, rule of scientific notation. 6 and minus 2 make 4. Minus 3 is 10 to the 1st. 4 times 10 to the 1st meters. The years cancel out. 4 times 10 to the 1st is 40 meters. 40 meters of erosion. Looking at these maps, that looks intuitively believable to me. What would that be for Ian Stewart's map in Fable? At an erosion rate of only 2 centimeters every 1,000 years for 200 million years. That's a long time, 200 meters on our time scale. 2 centimeters is 2 times 10 to the minus 2 meters divided by 1,000 years, which is 1 times 10 to the 3 years, times 200 million years, which is 2 times 10 to the 8th. All right, that equals 2 times 2 is 4. 8 and negative 2 is 6 minus 3, leaves 4 times 10 to the 3rd. Once again, meters, years cancel, but 4,000 meters. Mount Rainier in Washington State is 4,392 meters. They have to ignore the inevitable erosion to convince us that all the fossils found are millions of years older than they really are. Think to yourself, what sort of event could bury animals as big as these were under such pressure, such depth, that they were preserved as fossils? Isaac Newton said we are to admit no more causes of natural things than such as are both true and sufficient to explain their appearance. Therefore, to the same natural effects we must, as far as possible, assign the same causes. That was Newton's own way of stating Occam's razor, named after William of Ockham, a Franciscan friar who lived from 1287 to 1347. The most obvious direct explanation is usually the truth. The most obvious direct explanation for all the features that we find on Earth is the world flood described in Genesis. Popular atheist scientists that we see on National Geographic, Nova, the BBC, the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, any television network, are not going to tell you the other side, the true side of the story. The evidence shows this Earth is thousands of years old, not billions. Evidence from geology and erosion rates and radiometric dating support creation and a world flood. Evidence from biology and the fossil record, specifically carbon-14 dating, are solid evidence for a young Earth. We are led to believe that recent discoveries in DNA and genetics support the religion of evolutionism. They don't. Logic professor Thomas Kendall uses genetics and irreducible complexity to show that macroevolution is beyond unlikely. It's impossible. Brian Nichol is a computer animator that understands Dr. Walt Brown's hydroplate theory in detail. He has a now combined 6-part series that is 2 hours 41 minutes that demonstrates how much more logical sense this theory makes than deep-time dogma. A few more recommendations. Dr. Steve Austin is an expert on coal. The coal deposits we find and mine are predominantly ancient woodlands buried by the world flood about 5,000 years ago. It only takes 8 months for wood to become coal when buried in ideal conditions. This was demonstrated by Dr. Robert Gentry and his son David in this documentary. On the subject of calculating the age of the earth based upon Scripture, Nathan H83 has an upload entitled, "Were the Pyramids Built Before the Flood?" I'm not certain how to pronounce Walter's last name, but that's how to spell it, Veith. If you are still not convinced that deep time is a dogma, you will be if you continue to hear creationist arguments on YouTube. After going through life believing that most of this deep time dogma was probably true, it took hundreds of hours of creation science documentaries, lectures, and debates on the topic before I became confident that Genesis was the literal truth. If you choose to continue to look into this, you will come to realize that creation is the truth. This realization is profound and will change your worldview. Any scientific theory that begins with this assumption, assuming that God does not exist and the Bible is just a bunch of myths, then maybe this is how things came to be as they are. Any theory that starts with that assumption is going to be wrong. Isaac Newton knew that, as did many other founders of science. Those who decide what is taught in schools at all levels, what is in textbooks, what is taught on television networks, are not Bible believers. They indoctrinate us all as young children to believe that any real scientist or science teacher has to be an atheist. Dr. Mark Eastman, as a young medical doctor, had lost the faith he had had prior to being indoctrinated into evolutionism as an undergraduate biology major. Mark watched a recording of creation scientist Dr. A.E. Wilder Smith, and before he was 30 minutes into the recording, Dr. Eastman was convinced the Bible was right after all. I hope and pray that I can produce a recording that effective for someone.